I do now have the pleasure to introduce our final panel of the day, Navigating Immigration in Our Communities. Asian Americans are deeply impacted by immigration policies, from the experiences of Dreamers and DACA recipients to challenges related to alien land laws and H-1B visas. These issues shape the lives and the futures of many individuals and families. This panel will examine the historical and current impacts of these policies, highlighting key challenges and potential policy changes affecting Asian American communities. Our moderator is Martin Kim. Martin serves as the Director of Immigration Advocacy at Asian Americans Advancing Justice, where he advocates for a fairer immigration system by developing public policy research, strategies, analysis, and by engaging with key legislative and executive stakeholders. Please join me in welcoming Martin and our panelists to the stage.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the final and best plenary of the day. As was stated, my name is Martin Kim. I use he, him pronouns. I'm the Director of Immigration Advocacy at Asian Americans Advancing Justice, AJC. I'm so excited to be here today with my three panelists here who have experience in the Biden administration, within Congress, and also in the immigration movement. And I'll hand it to them quickly, starting with Kam, to introduce themselves and the work that they do.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kam Mua. I work at the Southeast Asia Resource Action Center, CRAC for short. And we are a civil rights organization based in DC with a satellite office in California. And our work is really focused on keeping families together, making sure that our families are healthy, and recovering and healing from trauma and war. That's because we work specifically with Southeast Asian refugee populations from Cambodia, Laos, and Vietnam. And one of the core issues that we work on is immigration and the removal of our populations.
Hi, everyone. My name is Laura Munoz-Lopez. I'm the Deputy Member Services Director for the Democratic Caucus under the chairman of Pete Aguilar. Thank you so much for having me on this panel. Just a little bit of background. I immigrated to Colombia at the age of 5. I grew up most of my life undocumented until June of 2012 when President Obama gave the executive order for DACA. I was able to adjust my status in 2017 through my U.S. citizen spouse petitioning me. Immigration for me, first and foremost, while it is why I became a public servant, is really my way of life and what propels me and guides me in the work that I do. I started on the Hill in 2019, starting as a judiciary legislative assistant for Congressman Greg Stanton, who was a freshman at the time. After that, I went to go work for Mr. Aguilar doing member services, but my start in DC was at a faith-based lobbying organization called Network Lobby. If you've heard of Nuns on the Bus, the faith-based advocacy space, that's where I started. And then I spent 2 years at CAP working on the immigration team. I look forward to the conversation today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you so much to APAICS for having this very important session today related to immigration. So my name is Manpreet Kaur Teji. I previously served in the Biden-Harris administration as the Director for Immigration Policy at the White House Domestic Policy Council. And prior to that, just like Laura, I was also in Congress. I worked in the U.S. Senate for 5 years. The most recent position I held was Immigration Counsel on the Senate Judiciary Committee, chaired by then Senator Durbin. And then I started my career in policy, really a testament to APAICS. I was an APAICS fellow in 2017, and I served in Congresswoman Judy Chu's office. And my first day on the Hill was actually the day DACA got rescinded in 2017, which really spearheaded the work that I got to do. But I come to this work as a policy professional, but also as a daughter of immigrants. My parents' journey to this country is what carries me every day in the work that I do in working on immigration. And so I've worked on a wide range of policy issues relating to border policy, expanding legal and humanitarian pathways, STEM immigration, high-skilled immigration, and legalization efforts for Dreamers and so many other populations. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation today, particularly as it relates to the Asian American and Pacific Islander communities. And in my current capacity, I serve as the Senior Policy Counsel and Special Advisor at Welcome.us, which is a national initiative that mobilizes Americans from all walks of life to support and help resettle newcomers into the United States. Thank you.
Thank you again to our panelists. Looking forward to the discussion. And before we get started with the discussion in earnest, I have the unenviable task of trying to give some historical context. So I've been given 1 to 2 minutes to cover some 300 years of history. Obviously, as a caveat, like I said, I have 1 to 2 minutes, and our communities have, as many of you know, an astonishingly diverse set of stories and experiences, so I'm simply not going to capture all the nuance. And I want to say specifically and particularly that it's important to recognize especially that the Pacific Islander immigration experience and the Asian American immigration experience are very different, and there are different sets of challenges for those parts of our community. But broad strokes. When I was preparing for this panel and I was thinking about how to contextualize the history of immigration from Asia and the Pacific Islands to the US, I was struck by this pattern I kept seeing in the history, right? These cycles of welcome and then exclusion, right? So from the very earliest parts of our history, I mean, folks know that in the 1800s, during the gold rush, many immigrants from China came to the US. What did that lead to? That led to the 1882 Chinese Exclusion Act, which was the first law that specifically targeted a particular group based solely on their place of birth, on their national origin, right? Going farther along into the 1900s, into World War II, we see the incarceration of Japanese Americans, right? In the 1980s, again, we see anti-Japanese sentiment, the murder of Vincent Chin. In post 9/11, we see the targeting of Arab, Middle Eastern, Muslim, South Asian individuals based on their perceived race, ethnicity, religion, right? And into today, we see now this overheated rhetoric around China and the targeting of people, again, based on their national origin. And it's a reminder that throughout history, right, our communities, whether individually or collectively, have been targeted on misguided, outdated, racist ideas of who belongs, who is and is not an American. Now, before I move on from this point, one small point I want to make is our communities were not passive bystanders to this kind of exclusion, right? Throughout history, in response to the kinds of exclusion I'm talking about, our community stood up, our community fought. Out of Chinese exclusion, right, we see the 1898 Wong Kim Ark case, which is the seminal case on birthright citizenship, right? During World War II, there were court cases, there were protests, there were fights against Japanese incarceration, and so on and so forth into today, right? And so as we are looking at an immigration landscape right now that to many people is disturbing, is horrifying, it's a reminder that this is not new. And not only that, that as a community, as people who, as communities who have experienced this kind of exclusion before, we are duty-bound to continue to push back, to advocate, and to fight not just for our communities, but all communities who are being targeted. So to move to my first question, obviously, there are many challenges in the immigration landscape right now. Kam, I know there's one in particular that is top of mind for a lot of people, and that's immigration enforcement, right? Can you talk a little bit about how immigration enforcement affects our communities in particular?
You know, when you say that this isn't new, you're right. For Southeast Asian American populations, this isn't a new issue. our families have been torn apart under every administration. There are 15,000 Southeast Asian Americans who face orders of removal specifically because they've come into contact with the criminal legal system. And I think one of the things that we're currently seeing in this administration is this shift in narrative about how immigrants aren't criminals. And I think we're hyper-focusing too much on criminality when the reality is that it doesn't really matter. And this administration has shown us that it doesn't matter what you did, what you do, or what you will do. They're coming after all of us anyway. And the shift that we need to be making when we talk about immigrants who have any sort of record is the way that our due process rights are being trampled on, how they don't respect our First Amendment rights, how they're coming after us for everything under the sun, despite where we come from. I think for our populations, I do want to make clear that the Asian American experience isn't a monolithic experience. Southeast Asian Americans have a very different migration history than the vast majority of Asian Americans. When you come here as a refugee and as someone who was born in a refugee camp, the experience looks different. When we first came here because of US occupation in Southeast Asia, because of the Vietnam War, the Khmer Rouge genocide, the secret war in Laos, it's a very different experience. When you're escaping genocide and when you're escaping ethnic cleansing and political persecution and trying to cross rivers and oceans to make it here alive. When we first came, the US resettled our populations and dispersed us specifically to try to make us more American and to tap down on the creation of ethnic enclaves. For us, that's created a rise in contact with law enforcement in over-policed neighborhoods. And the reality is that those populations are now facing removal some 30, 40 years later when they have full families. We're only beginning to see it now for even more people. But the reality is that our country has always attacked immigrants. And they've been doing this because of the 1996 immigration laws, because of the way that our immigration enforcement is so entangled with the law enforcement system. In fact, we see it now. We see how law enforcement is an active part of the raids on undocumented communities, on dreamers, on people in workplaces. And I think for us, we have to really think through how Asian Americans come together to oppose this effort by the administration to try to remove everyone. The other thing that I think is worth noting is, I can talk about the Alien Enemies Act. It's a wartime power that the administration is using to go after folks who are assumed to be related to as an enemy of the state. It's been used 3 times in US history, and it's being used again. Multiple judges have said that it's unlawful. But the administration still does it because they, quite frankly, don't care. And I think when we're thinking about immigration, we should really heavily consider the fact that this administration doesn't care about our communities and immigrants and refugees and asylum seekers. And I think we need to protect each other regardless of what our background looks like. I'll stop there. I think my time is running out.
I just want to thank you for that comment. We're starting on this discussion, and I want to turn the focus to something I think has been really surprising to a lot of people under this administration, which is the attack on existing pathways of immigration. So Manpreet, I'm just wondering if you can speak a little to attacks, including on student visas and other existing pathways to immigrate to the U.S. and what that means for our communities. Absolutely.
And I think this is an important question given the fact that we are seeing we have historically always seen challenges to the legal immigration system for decades now, and it's only going to get worse based on the trajectory we're in. And it's not just a rollback on the progress of immigration, it's literally eroding legal pathways to come to the United States. And so I'll start with green cards and the green card backlog, and then we'll get to student visas. So Asian immigrants, particularly from India, China, the Philippines, and Vietnam are disproportionately affected by massive delays in the green card backlog. And for employment-based green cards, particularly high-skilled workers who are on H-1B visas, the system imposes this thing called per-country caps. And that means that regardless of how many individuals come from a country, no more than 7% of green cards can be issued to nationals of that country in a given year. So what does that result in? Essentially, for example, Indian nationals can face decade-long waits, up to 20 to 25 years in many cases. And these are individuals who've bought houses here, paid taxes, have been employed, have been contributing to our economy. And the most important piece is they're making the United States a global leader by pursuing careers in very innovative sectors. And they're building lives here, and they're essentially being placed in this limbo. They really can't settle. And they're unable to switch jobs freely. They're unable to sponsor many family members. And it has ripple effects on their children as well as they age out. So if a child turns 21 and their father or mother has not received a green card yet, they essentially age out as well and can become out of status and essentially become similar to like a legal dreamer or a documented dreamer. And so that's a challenge that we've been seeing over the years, and it's increasingly getting worse. On the family-based side, Asian Americans are also waiting to reunite with their families, and the backlogs are significantly hard in our communities, especially when our communities, family is not just tradition, it's a necessity with how we live, especially with extended family. And our community is waiting up to 15 to 20 years to bring over a sibling. And it breaks the very promise of our immigration system that is supposed to be targeting and supposed to be promoting family reunification. And our laws are literally not following that and actually breaking families apart for decades. And so I said this earlier, these issues have predated the current administration, and they will continue to get more challenging in the coming years if they're not reformed. And so now we're seeing a very interesting and unfortunate shift in the alarming developments that are affecting folks who are here on student visas, which has been a key entry point for Asian Americans, Pacific Islanders coming into the United States. So in recent months, we've seen international students have their visas revoked based on political expression. One case that got a lot of attention that you may be following in the news is a student from a Turkish PhD student at Tufts University who was detained for over a month, and the government accused her of supporting terrorism without any evidence. And her student visa was canceled, and it took a federal court to order her release, and she was actually just released from detention on Friday and just returned back to Boston on Saturday. And then the current administration has also launched what's been dubbed as Catch and Revoke initiative, and it's using AI technology and going through social media to monitor and surveil international students. And so what we've seen over the last several months is actually 1,000 students have reportedly had their visas visas canceled or denied based on perceived political views, even in the absence of any wrongdoing. These include many from Asian and Middle Eastern backgrounds, and it sends a chilling effect to these communities that your presence here is not secure and you're constantly being followed and watched, even if you are following the rules. And so for Asian students who represent the majority of international students in the United States, this is extremely terrifying. These individuals who contribute billions of dollars to our economy and are deeply embedded in our academic institutions. Some departments at universities are fully funded by the reliance of these students, and now they're being monitored and penalized just for free speech. And so putting this all together, I'll be very quick. Green card backlogs, attacks on family reunification, and student visa revocations, you get a picture of an immigration system that is becoming more exclusionary, more hostile, and less predictable. So kind of dovetailing on what Kam shared, immigration is such a vast issue. There are so many different aspects to the system itself, but in this moment in time, I can confidently say there are attacks in every single area of immigration too, and especially towards the Asian American communities.
Thank you for that, Manpreet. And I know we've been talking a lot about the challenges, so I want to turn for a moment, Laura, just thinking about what we can do as a community and what we can do collectively. How can we collectively work with our congressional representatives to push back, to advocate for the reforms, the changes we want to see?
Thank you for that. And I second everything that my co-panelists have shared right now. I think, it's a tough question. I think right now we are grappling with there's not enough being done, but what does enough look like? And I don't know that there is necessarily the right answer for that. I think it looks like a few different things. So I just want to share a little bit of the things that we have seen so far in this administration, and from a congressional side that maybe have worked in just different ways that we can engage our members of Congress. To start, and I think you mentioned it great, how can we work collaboratively and collectively with them? We know that these members are elected by us, many of us, right, or our communities. But at the same time, we all have to see them as partners in ways that we can collaborate with them. They bring something to that table that is different than what groups bring to the table and communities. And I want to get into that in a little bit, but I just want to explain that that's kind of like my framing for what I will be sharing. We all know that it's been almost 40 years of no congressional action on immigration, which is why we are now experiencing all these issues. It feels like they're all coming to a head, but to be honest, if you've been in this work, you know that this is a feeling that has happened many times before. I think right now, personally, the biggest difference is that they really are coming for everyone. We saw that this weekend with members of Congress when they went to a detention facility to conduct oversight. Not only the members, but also the mayor of one of the largest cities in the country. So I think that is the biggest change. And I do think that as unfortunate as that incident was this weekend, it almost takes things to get to that point for people to actually wake up a little bit and react. And I don't think members of Congress are necessarily immune from that. And so I do think that the fact that we have digital engagement and those types of things to be able to push light on some of these things is really helpful. But in terms of, how can we work with members of Congress? One of the biggest things, and I know you've heard it before, is sharing your story, right? We've all heard that. I can tell you that right now from the member services side, as someone who's talking to a lot of offices are really hungry for stories that they can use, whether it's in committee or on their social media or, for whatever reason, right? But it's really hard to find vetted stories. And so I'm putting that out there. Just if you're in an organization that's collecting these types of things, it's really hard for them to vet. And I think that's one of the reasons why a lot of things aren't actually pushed out. Obviously, I'm surrounded by people that know that immigration is very complex, and my immigration story can be very different from someone who also had DACA, got married, and all those things. Not two immigration stories are necessarily the same. And so I think members are very cautious in what they're sharing because sometimes they can't fully vet what they're putting out. So any help with that would be great. But I do think that sharing the story really shares the full spectrum of the immigration experience, right? We know that immigration goes into housing, healthcare, education, all of these different aspects. I think that we can do a better job of finding those nexuses and also finding those groups and those communities that can help collaborate to give a full picture, right? Immigration really shouldn't be something that we're talking about when something really bad happens, right? We should be talking about it in the context of all of the issues that we're working on. And that is not any different than from the Hill side. We need to talk about it with all these other issues. Another thing that I wanted to focus on just from the congressional side, we focus a lot on the members of Congress, your representative. I'll use myself as an example. I'm originally from South Carolina. That's where I was raised. My member of Congress is not going to be very helpful if I was on the other side for anything that I need. So one, I think identifying those state partners and the people that influence those legislators, right? So like in South Carolina, I know who probably would get under the skin of my representative. Like how can we work together there, right? To draw some light on that. Another big group that I don't hear a lot of engagement on are the caucuses. I am the point person for the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, and we have 2 folks in our office that handle the other 2 of the tri-caucuses. But the caucuses have full staff, right? Sometimes they have more more flexibility in being able to get out in the community, collect those stories, turn things around a little bit more quickly. So, don't roll them out, and also like get creative. We have the Democratic Women's Caucus. We have a lot of different caucuses. The last thing that I will mention, and I can get into others a little bit more, is just to remember all of the tools of advocacy. We obviously have a lot of social media right now. I'm so happy to hear about the student that was released, but I remember Ayanna Presley going down there to see where the student was. Like, that was really big on social media. Sometimes it's just almost like feeding these ideas to the members because there's just so much going on. And what we learned from Trump 1, there's a lot all the time at once. It's just constant. So as much as we can help to prep these offices to be able to do that kind of work would be really helpful. I have a few more ideas, but I'll stop there and can get into it a little bit later or after the panel.
Thank you so much. And we have about 10 minutes left, so I do want to go into a question that I've been thinking about a lot as we think about this, what's happening now. And I think you mentioned it, the length of time that we've been waiting, our community has been waiting for significant change on immigration. I think one silver lining amidst a lot of the kind of horrible stories that we've heard is that I think people are starting to realize that the status quo is not going to save us. Even if things go back to normal, the laws, the tools that are being used now to conduct immigration enforcement, to tear apart our communities, will still be there. So the question I have for all 3 of you, in whatever order, is what do you think a better future for our community looks like in the immigration space, and how can we get there? So whoever would like to start.
I can go. So in 2018, the Trump administration placed visa sanctions on Laos and Cambodia under 243D of the Immigrant and Nationality Act. Basically, what we saw was a 279% increase in deportations of Cambodians during that time frame, and it also became a full immigration ban on Laos. So no one could come to the U.S. through the family system, through employment, through any means, no tourists. And when we worked with the Biden administration to lift that in 2021, we saw that folks were still being processed to this day. And so there's been significant delays in folks from Laos coming to the US to reunite with families, to come work here. I say this because I think for a lot of the folks who do work in the immigration space and the intersection with criminal justice is that we have already outlined the solutions. And the solutions have never been about embracing the status quo of the immigration system. We know that it's inherently broken, it is inherently dehumanizing, it hurts and tears families apart, it has major economic impacts, it has a downstream impact on the mental health and well-being of children, the economic ability of families to keep food on the table. And those solutions have existed for years. The New Way Forward Act by Representative Chuy Garcia, that's been introduced every year for, 4 cycles now at this point, and it's to amend the 96 immigration laws. People like Representative Ayanna Presley, Rep. Omar from Minnesota, have talked about 243D and talked about how we need to restrict the ability of the president and the agencies to unilaterally place those sanctions on countries because they can administratively implement an immigration ban on any country that they deem recalcitrant. In fact, we saw that draft list leaked on the New York Times. And, Representative Judy Chu have introduced bills like the Southeast Asian Deportation Relief Act to prevent the removals of Southeast Asian Americans and, more importantly, to bring back people who've been deported. So I say this because I don't think we need to think that creatively. The solutions have been out there for years, and it's been about how do we decouple the immigration system from the enforcement system. And the reality is that we have solutions. I think all the solutions to many of our problems exist in GAO reports, and no one reads them. You know, so our solutions are there. I think we just have to help create the political will for members of Congress to embrace them. There shouldn't be any reason why these bills, cycle after cycle, get so few members of Congress on board, when the reality is that these are humane and fair solutions that has been proposed for decades. And now that we're in an environment where the current administration is going after everyone, now we're talking about it, I feel like we just are missing the boat. And the reality is that I think for us to move forward, we have to completely re-envision what immigration looks like and move forward with more progressive, humane policies that folks have been shouting about for years.
I second everything Com said. I think the solutions are staring right at us. We have these pieces already built out. These are thoughtful immigration advocates who have been working on these issues for so many years, and it is the same reports and bills and GAO documentation that we are looking at constantly. We can count hundreds of reports that can talk about the economic impact of immigration and how positive it is for our GDP and for our economy, and how it can actually save us from inflation. These are not new concepts, and the solutions are looking right at us. The organization I work for, Welcome.us, we take an approach to immigration as it relates to private sponsorship programs like the processes for Ukrainians, Cubans, Haitians, Venezuelans, Nicaraguans, Welcome Corps, really bringing other voices to the table who have never actually ever even thought about doing anything related to immigration. And we have brought these Americans who have come from a vast part of America, from zip codes all across the nation, who have been apolitical, who have been from both sides of the party, and who have basically joined the mission to sponsor an immigrant to come to the United States purely because they believe in welcoming. And it is bringing other voices to the table that I have seen the journey that they are taking to be more mindful and inclusive of other immigrant populations. And I think that that's an avenue that we should consider exploring, bringing other voices to the table, reaching out to people who've never actually ever talked about immigration, bringing them into the table, and essentially doing what Laura, you highlighted, which is we're not going to be able to be effective with maybe this one Republican senator from X, Y, and Z state, but if we can find movers and shakers in those states who can reach them, they're not going to listen to someone like me, but they might reach out to they might listen to this sponsor who's been a veteran in South Carolina for so many years, who now sponsored 10 Ukrainians or 3 Haitians, and is fighting for his life to save these people now that they've came here through these lawful immigration pathways. And bringing those voices and really elevating them into the space that we need them to be heard is really important. And that is a big component of what Welcome does, is really bringing these sponsor voices to the table, storytelling, bringing these pieces to mass media, and sharing their voices so that the public perception of immigration changes. And it is not about we need to save immigrants. It's immigrants add value to this country. And why do we need to keep them here?
Yeah, and I would just add to that, they bring value, but they're also my community member, right? I go to my place of worship with them. I've seen them at the grocery store. Our kids are in, classes together. I think for me, sometimes it's hard to even reimagine what it could be like, because I haven't even been in this work for that long. But sometimes it's hard to just kind of see what would a welcome immigration system look like. And I agree with them. A lot of these answers are already there. I think we can also look at some other countries too that have decided that they are not going to be like the U.S. and is actually going to be welcoming. I mentioned in the beginning that I was from Colombia. Seeing how they pretty quickly were able to set up so millions of Venezuelans could literally come over into Colombia and get set up. And I visited and I met with some of them, and just hearing their stories and just thinking wow, the Colombian government can do this. Why can the U.S. government not? And then you see things like the termination of programs that were wildly successful, TPS, the Cuban, Haitian, Nicaraguan, Venezuelan programs, like, the administration can do this, right? I think it's a lot of about the political will, which is why we need to keep reminding elected officials. And I think that it goes a little like beyond members of Congress. I'm sorry, I have to go back to my other question to just add that, like, these elected officials, like, especially now when we're in the trifecta of like Republican controlled everything, we can't underestimate the power of an elected official, whether it's a city council person, a mayor, a governor, like really trying to identify those partners and like, bring them to the line of like, this is what we actually need. Like, this is what it's going to look like to be an ally. And I think for me, when I think about immigration, I think about that welcoming community. I think about what it felt like for me when I was able to adjust and I got my Welcome to the United States packet, although I had been here for 25 years. It was still like that feeling, like we can do that for people. And I definitely want to hear more about your organization after this. But I think that like, we know what this system looks like. I think that we have to remind those elected officials around us and each other, like why we are in this work, especially right now when it feels very overwhelming and almost impossible.
Thank you to the three of you for bearing with my many questions. I'll just end with one thought, right? Which is today, almost 2/3 of Asian Americans are immigrants. About 1 in 6 Pacific Islanders are immigrants. And about, if you include children of immigrants, almost over 90% of Asian Americans are immigrants or children of immigrants. So this is a really salient issue for our community. And with that, please join me in thanking our wonderful panelists here.
Thank you so much, Martin, and the panelists. Martin, you promised us the best panel. I can't take sides, but that was a great panel. It's certainly an exciting topic. I don't know why some people think immigration is not exciting. Nothing gets Asian Americans' hearts beating faster than immigration, so come on. All right, well, as we wrap up the first day of the Legislative Leadership Summit, it is my honor to introduce KPAC Executive Member and LLS Honorary Co-Chair, Congresswoman Jill Tokuda. Congresswoman Tokuda is the U.S. Representative for Hawaii's 2nd Congressional District, elected in 2022. Prior to Congress, she served in the Hawaii State Senate, focusing on education, economic development, and environmental issues. Here is a special message for you from Congresswoman Tokuda.
Aloha, everyone. This is Congresswoman Jill Tokuda from the great state of Hawaii. Come on, let's start talking story. Since I can't be with you today, I wanted to at least introduce you to my amazing team. Aloha. Noah. Hello. Katharina. So when you come into our office, you're instantly greeted with a lot of aloha spirit, which is something that we want to make sure everyone gets to see. Hi, Megan. It's important for me that our office feels like home to a whole lot of people. From the things that they see to the faces that they are greeted with. I was very blessed early on in life living in Hawaii because for me, potentially being a member of Congress didn't seem like an impossible thing. We had trailblazers like Patsy Mink, Dan Inouye, Dana Kaka that were right there in Congress representing not just Hawaii, but who we are as Asian American, Native, Hawaiian, Pacific Islander people. And I feel that even now, generations since those moments, we have an obligation and responsibility to continue to represent our culture, our people, and our issues, our hopes, our dreams, our challenges, the opportunities that we want to see, which is why the Legislative Leadership Summit that you are at is so critically important, because it's about building up that bench. I remember, Patsy Mink, whose face is right here in the cabinet, Senator Akaka, Senator Hirono, Senator Inouye. It was so important for them that it wasn't just about them. It was about those that they bring in with them. And so these kind of summits are critically important. We're doing work here in Congress to make sure that our data is disaggregated so that we're not some monolithic, ANHPI group, that they see us for who we are so they can better respond to our healthcare needs, disparities that exist, our educational opportunities, what's important to us, like jobs and the economy. And so That's what we do as an Asian American Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander caucus here, our KPAC caucus in Congress, is we fight for that representation. We fight to be seen, be heard, and that every action we take in Congress elevates all of our families and people. So that's really important work we do. But I want to show you something else. Come with me. By the way, that is like the most popular poster, not my children, although quite handsome, right? My kids and my husband, but that's the most popular poster that I've got in my office for sure. Everybody comments on it, but come back to our ledge pit. So to me, when we talk about what's the future, how can they be involved, how can you be involved, I'd love to introduce you, say hi everyone to our ledge pit here, Anna, our APAICS fellow. Oh, by the way, Morella. We have Nick back there, Ben, Keaton. So when you want to really talk about diversity, even representation across the country, it's about making sure that the seats in our offices are filled with people who ultimately will be the future. For all we know, folks back there in our ledge pit who are giggling over there, they could be taking my job. Hopefully not anytime soon though, because I've got a lot more work to do in Congress. But it is about creating opportunities in space for people to have that experience of learning what it's like to go through the legislative process, how to create bills, how to present testimonies, have the confidence maybe one day to run for office and end up on these TV screens as well, representing their communities and their states. And so the one big piece of advice and suggestion would be find any opportunity you can to be engaged, to be involved, whether it's a fellowship, whether it's taking on a job opportunity where you're going to learn how to do things, or just plain old jump into the hot water and run for office. We have to make sure that more people that look like us are sitting in the seats of Congress. And I'm so humbled and honored to be a partner and an ally to all of you as we continue to work hard to get that representation that AA and HPI need and deserve in this country. Take care, everyone, and I hope to see you soon. Mahalo.
What an honor to have Congresswoman Tokuda share with us such wonderful remarks as well as a tour of her office. Make ramen, not war. I'm definitely going to have to get that one. A special thank you to our panelists, all of our moderators, guest speakers for taking the time to share your expertise and insightful perspectives with all of us today. We also greatly appreciate our premium summit partners, Amazon and Johnson & Johnson. We also thank all of our other sponsors for this event. Your support allows APAICS to fulfill its mission of promoting Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander participation and representation at all levels of the political process, from community service to elected office. Please visit apaics.org to learn more about this important work. And I look forward to seeing you tomorrow for the second day of the summit, when you will hear from speakers like Senators Tammy Duckworth and Andy Kim, Representative Sri Tanadar, Connecticut Attorney General William Tong, and more. So we will see you bright and early for breakfast at 8 a.m. And pro tip, if you are catching up on Deli Boys, get started early. We'll see you tomorrow. Thank you.